Hi, welcome to the ISB Essays for Round 1 2025. I'm Arjun and I'm going to help you answer these questions in a way that sounds unique to you and gets you an interview call, even if it doesn't get you admitted right away. Now, ISB has had a long and stupid tradition of changing the essay topics again and again every year. This year, the tradition has remained unchanged. It seems that the admissions committee got locked inside a room for 48 hours and was told to come up with the most inefficient possible way to ask the same thing they've been asking for the last 10 years in just a slightly different way. Why they do this, I do not know. My only guess is that they feel students might get too used to the topic, or they might use an admissions consultant who has this rote formula that they can just use to, crack the admissions process somehow. But if that's so easy, then what's your admissions committee doing? Like, how good are they that they can't even discern what's good writing, what's unique writing, and what's been mass produced by an admissions consultant? No idea. No comment there. Anyway, if you go back to 2023, the essay topics were the same. They just asked four simple things. What personal and professional qualities do you have? What long-term and short-term goals do you have? Why do you want to do the MBA at this point in time? And what unique things do you bring to the PGP cohort that might add to their experience or make their experience at ISB overall more well-rounded, more fun? That's about it. Those are just the four questions, and I've literally broken down what questions they can ask you regardless of what word salad they put up in the essay topics. Now, this year they've increased the number of essays from 2 to 3. But the spirit of the questions remains essentially the same four questions that I talked about, because the way people judge whether you're good to do an MBA or not does not change year on year. Like, if anybody comes to you and tells you that last year they had a focus on peer learning and this year they have this focus on leadership qualities, doesn't really make sense. It really doesn't make sense, because essentially you're being judged on all characteristics and all attributes rather than like one specific theme that they chose that year, like color of the year or something like that. Anyhow, going forward, I'd like to save you and your brains from the word salad of the topics. So I'm going to be referring to these essays as question 1, question 2, and question 3. I might be using different words to say the same essay topic, but don't get confused. This is just my attempt to simplify the prompts to you. So let's go ahead and start with simplifying this stuff, right? Question 1 asks you, what unique experiences have shaped who you are? What have these experiences taught you about leadership and the kind of leader that you aspire to be? I would reword this prompt to ask, what are your leadership qualities? Do you have evidence for this? Clean and simple. Question number 2 asks you, what intellectual experiences have influenced your approach to learning and have led you to pursue an MBA? Please describe using anecdotes from your own experiences. Breaking this down again, it's just very simple. Why MBA, and what will you do after you get the MBA? Question number 3 asks you, share with us any intellectual pursuits, unique perspectives, or experiences that you pursued, that have shaped your worldview, your growth through these pursuits, and how they could potentially contribute to our learning community. Oh my God, this is an optional essay for 250 questions. They've literally used the word pursuits or some synonym of it 3 times in the question. This is like, they couldn't run it through ChatGPT to kind of make it concise. I don't know. Anyway, the question simplified is quite simple. It says, tell us something about yourself that your batchmates will find interesting or useful. So let's dive right into the questions and how to answer them. But please remember that throughout the video, I'm going to be referring to them as question number 1, worded in the way I just said, right? Or question number 2, worded in the way I said. Question 3, worded in the way I said. Do not get confused. Just map the questions out to whatever feels comfortable to you. Question number 1. What are your leadership qualities and do you have evidence of them? The key word here is leadership. Be very careful what experiences you choose to write about in this essay. Make sure you limit them to maybe 1 to 2 examples max. Ensure that they come from some sort of work-related experience that you got from your job, or some sort of non-work related experience you got from anything that you did that has social or entrepreneurial value. I find that most people that I consult with have a lot of trouble figuring out this second part, which is something that has social or entrepreneurial value. Sometimes they just choose things that might have very personal value to them, but might really not bring out leadership qualities that they think they bring out. So here are a few examples that you can take to kind of refer and build your own case for yourself. Let's say that you climbed Everest Base Camp. Now, this is a great example of physical fitness and personal persistence and training, etc. But it might not necessarily come out as a leadership quality. On the other hand, if you helped handle an emergency on Everest or at Everest Base Camp, or maybe you trained athletes to climb Everest because you've had a long history of being into physical fitness or mountaineering or whatever it is. Now, that might be a good leadership quality to talk about that's non-work related. Similarly, I find a lot of candidates coming up with, I ran my first marathon this year and it took a really long time to train and practice, etc., etc., etc. Now, running a marathon by itself is a great physical achievement. I'm not trying to undermine it or underplay it. However, training people to run marathons or organizing a marathon by yourself for charity, now that has social value, and to some extent it has entrepreneurial value as well because it shows your organizational skills. That is a leadership quality. Now, if you don't have non-work related qualities that you can talk about or non-work related incidents that you can talk about, do not be disheartened. As long as your work related stuff is impactful and well fleshed out, it should not matter. But the one thing you should never do is force an example just so that you can sound more well-rounded as a personality. It simply does not work. It comes across as artificial, to be very frank. Now, if the value of what you're trying to say as a quality, the central theme, is not very clear in the first one or two sentences, then the reader is not going to be incentivized to read the rest of the example, which is why it's very important to make that leadership quality known upfront very well, and also to choose examples that support that and provide evidence of that very clearly in the next 2 to 3 sentences. That would be like the base foundational must do for this essay that I would say. Once you've selected the examples, it's time to write a good story about the experiences that you had. Remember that every good story has 5 key elements. It has a character, which is who, in this case, you. It has a setting, which is the where and what of the stuff that's happening around you. The plot, the specific events that happen that you want to talk about. Conflict, or the challenges that you faced. And the theme or the central message, or in this case, the central leadership quality that you really want to expound on. Now, let's take a simple example as to how this might sound. Let's say that you're a journalist working at a newspaper and you want to write about an experience that you had, which you think developed leadership qualities. So I would start with the character. I was 20 years old, employed at my first ever job as a journalist. Setting, I worked at Dainik Bhaskar, the biggest newspaper in India by circulation. 3.5 million people read this newspaper every single day. Plot, I was interviewing sources for a time critical story that I had to deliver in, 6 hours. Conflict, some of the sources took too much time to come to the point. Some of them rambled for 60 minutes trying to say something completely useless and non-factual. Theme, the central message or the central leadership quality that you develop might be something as simple as, I developed a mental filter that enabled me to catch important newsworthy action points from entire walls of text that people were writing or talking about. How does this translate into any other field or any other kind of work post MPA? You can say something like, I'm able to prioritize the important points from what people are saying. So for example, if I'm in a customer facing role, I'm able to listen to customers ramble on for 2 hours and complain and complain and complain, come up with a list of 100 features. And then I realized that there's just 1 or 2 features which if I prioritize and get completed, the customer would be 90% happy. It saves my team a ton of work. It saves my business a ton of wasted time and money. And it makes sure that customers feel that yes, we're being responsive and we're trying our best to get the features out as fast as possible. Or it might be something as simple as I know how to coordinate and organize stakeholders who are fighting with each other by just figuring out that stakeholder 1 requires X and Y, stakeholder 2 requires Z and A, and taking those together and saying, guys, look, you need 4 things and we'll prioritize and finish them off one by one. And this really helps to resolve conflicts and smoothen workflows between teams and stakeholders. Finally, just one last point about this essay is that when you're editing the essay, don't be too worried if the transitions between the story points are a little jumpy and abrupt. That's totally fine. The essay is just 400 words. I understand that it's really difficult to fit all of that experience and all of that character development into such a tiny space, but unfortunately, that's what MBA colleges require you to do. Let's go to question number 2, which is why MBA and what will you do after the MBA? You should answer this question by thinking very deeply about 4 things. A, is there something that I want to do with my life that I'm not currently doing right now? This could be trying to move into a completely new industry. This could be jumping a few levels in your existing job. You think you have the mentality for it, you think you have the skills for it, what you don't have is the knowledge for it. B, you should be thinking about a specific gap in your business knowledge that needs to be filled in order for you to get from point A to point B. C, you should be thinking about why an MBA is the only quick, efficient, substantial way for you to get to that point. Now, going back to the journalist example that I talked about in the first essay question, let's think about what the answer might look like. As a journalist, my skills in copywriting, storytelling, interviewing, shaping opinion, they've been honed time and again, year after year, year after year. However, in my interactions in these interviews with opinion shapers, thought leaders, and influencers from the media and advertising industry, I've realized that the most powerful people who shape opinion, who shape legislation, are sitting on that side of the table, on the other side. And I realized that that's the sort of role that I want to do. That's the sort of place that I want to be 5 years down the line. And I realized that in order to get there, I need to have an understanding of business fundamentals that I do not have right now and cannot gain even if I took 10 assignments as a journalist over the next 10 years in the finance sector alone. So this is why I need to do the MBA. Now, what sort of skills do I want to gain through this? Accounting skills, because then it lets me know what are the ways that companies get away with, financial crime or not paying taxes or not doing social responsibility activities, stuff like that. It could be something as simple as what are the ethical and unethical ways that companies have tried to market their products. Something as simple as McKinsey telling one of the big pharmaceutical companies in America that they should start selling more opioids and tablets to people, and that caused the opioid epidemic. And that's a great business case study of how consulting can go wrong. I might want to learn something about data analysis because as a journalist, I've had to analyze data by myself, but not like 3 million rows of data. I've rather had to depend on other people who have done the analysis to give me their inputs as a source. But I'd like to get to that source myself, and I'd like to have that credibility when I influence legislation or influence opinion. I don't want to be completely dependent on other people for data analysis. So anyway, list down a few skills like this that should help you kind of set the foundation for the whole what's your approach to learning and stuff that the actual question asks you. Now, the final thing you need to kind of think about is talking about the alternatives to this, right? So you could say something like ISB is the best place to do it because it's the top rated university in the country. But then, again, you need to maybe be a little bit more specific about why ISB particularly. You might want to pull out a few professors. Professor XYZ has the same background as me. He used to be an influencer in the media sector, or he's somebody who's talking actively in the marketing sector. And it would be lovely to just grab a cup of chai every week with him to get his inputs. Like that's a sort of extracurricular input that I want to use the professor's brains for. So you can kind of spice up your essay by just imagining yourself on the ISB campus and using the resources and utilizing them. So you start with here's my approach to learning. Here are the incidents that have shaped what I want to do for the next 5 years. Here's why I don't know certain things to get from point A to point B. Here's why the MBA will get me that. And then specifically, here's why the ISB MBA will help me to get there. So question number 2 is very simple as long as you structure it in this manner. Now we move on to the third question, which is tell us something about yourself that is important enough for your batchmates to know and important enough for ISB to give you admission over other people that we might be considering. Now, this essay is only 250 words and it has a tiny bracket that says optional, but I assure you it's important for you to consider this as a mandatory essay. This could be an extra factor that distinguishes you from other people who are applying to the college and have a very similar profile to yours, a very similar GMAT score to yours. That's a big risk that a lot of candidates run, that even though their experiences might sound unique, there's somebody out there for sure who's applying with identical characteristics and they might just have that tiny edge which pushes them out of the application pool. How I would answer this question is very simple. I would do two things. First thing is I would go through the entire batch profile for the ISB cohorts maybe 1 to 5 years before this application cycle. So let's say that you review people from the year 2022 or 2021. And what you're going to do is go into depth on the ISB website in terms of what are the demographics of the people who are coming there, what are their professional backgrounds, what's their age, what's their gender, what sort of previous industry did they work in, what sort of industries did they move into after finishing ISB and doing an MBA, where are they right now, are they still working their jobs or have they become entrepreneurs. You have a bunch of information that's available through the batch profiles and through LinkedIn itself, which helps you identify some things that might be underrepresented in the batch. Simple example I can give is, let's say that the college is heavily emphasizing consulting placements. Then maybe you're a person who can kind of break that trend and say that, look, with the skills that I have as a consultant, I don't even want to go into consulting. Instead, here's another space that I want to move into. Or it could be something like no other batch has had candidates who have worked as extensively in AI as I have, because I've been working with Google AI for like the past 3 years and I've been part of the development, and I can shape the opinion of people on campus regarding AI and what it can do. Now, the second thing that I would do, of course, is go through a ton of YouTube videos. There's a lot of material out there, interviews of previous candidates or previous alumni, how their life on campus was, what they liked, what they didn't like, how they contributed, who they looked up to. There's a ton of information out there which you can just repurpose into arguments in your essay rather than you having to come up with stuff on your own. So once you've done these two things, it's very simple. You need to write a good story around this. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you're a journalist and ISB does not have too many journalists, but let's say you're one of the only journalists, but you have this additional facet of yours, which is, in addition to being a journalist, I've also been immersed in classical singing or classical martial arts for a very long time. And I don't think that there's a lot of people on campus who know this stuff, which makes me very interesting to know, because I could help spread the art to a bunch of more people. I could contribute in a lot of events on ISB. People might want to come up to me and get into the whole scene post ISB, where I can provide them contacts and networks if they want to do something with that kind of knowledge. So you have a kind of rounded profile if you write this 250-word essay, right? It's a tiny amount of space, but it provides this one extra exposure to your profile, to important things in your profile, which you might not have been able to fit in the previous two essays. So given all that we've discussed, I just want to recap a few specific points. The first one is, be very careful in terms of what experiences you choose. Make sure that the focus of all the essays is on maybe 1 or 2 experiences max and does not go too far beyond that, because then that's a lot of cognitive overload or too many points for somebody to remember as unique about you. Third thing is, do a ton of research, and this research does not just need to be reaching out to admissions consultants or talking to alumni. It could be something as simple as going and watching a YouTube video of people who have been interviewed from ISB, or reading the batch placement reports, for example. There's a lot of material out there which you can repurpose and make unique to yourself if you just put the effort. And the last thing is, when you edit the essays, and this is very important, give yourself enough time to edit the essays. I've often written an essay which sounds amazing at that moment, and then like 6 days down the line I come back to it and I've changed out whole chunks or paragraphs of it. So give yourself at least a week to 2 weeks of time to edit the essay. And when you're editing, don't focus too much on the aesthetics, the grammar, the transitions, etc. It's more important that your story and your points are flowing very well, that everything makes logical sense when somebody's reading it, because that's what they remember. They're not really going to remember whether you transition from one paragraph to another very beautifully. Last thing that I do want to say is, yes, tomorrow is the deadline for R1. Actually, it's tonight, but you'll have to excuse me for the very late upload schedule. Of course, admissions and applications happen only once a year, and I don't really have much to talk about for the rest of the year. But what I have noticed, like one thing I've noticed from the previous years, is that there's a lot of heavy emphasis on making sure that essays are not AI written, or they're not AI inspired or whatever, which is why ISB included this whole newfangled interview round, which is you sitting and writing a spot essay or spontaneous essay, whatever it is. The question that I often get is, can I use AI to get ideas or write essays? I would argue that absolutely yes, but there are a few caveats there. One caveat is that an AI cannot truly understand the complexity of your experience or your story. Like, no matter what sort of prompt you give it, it's basically the voice of the entire internet. It's like putting your experience on Reddit and trying to get like an essay from it, right? It doesn't really make sense. People don't know you that well. Second thing is, of course, that AI writing does not have a unique voice. It does not have your voice, which means that it has a very generic tone and a few red flags that makes it very easy to identify it. It uses a few sentence structures which it repurposes across every single piece of material that anybody asks on the internet. So what you write and what somebody else writes with AI might start sounding the very same, which makes it a red flag for admissions officers. My recommendation is, if you're hell-bent on writing the essays yourself and not getting a consultant, absolutely fine, more power to you. Just make sure that you're only getting a few angles and ideas from AI and then writing the stuff yourself, typing it out by yourself and refining it by yourself. Do not depend on AI to do the editing for you. Aside from that, there's really not much to say, except that admissions essays are not as complicated as you think they are, or as people have built them up to be. Investing in an admissions consultant is a great investment if you ask me. I know that I'm personally incentivized to say this, but I do think generally it's a great investment, because that's a second pair of eyes on your essays, who sits with you consistently and tells you that this works, this does not work, and who brings in the experience of having done this multiple times and seen what works and what doesn't work. So with that, I'd like to close off this video and drop a comment if there's something else that I did not cover in this that you might like to know. I can make a separate video about it. And of course, like and subscribe to my channel. Ciao.